a course on best-selling author Michael Singer's Living Untethered, Part 4, coming up right after this. Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Yoel and so grateful to have you. And in today's video, we're going to pick up where we left off from the last video in our course on the best-selling author Michael Singer's book, Living Untethered. And today's video is going to discuss the next chapter of his book, which is entitled Thoughts and Dreams. So let's dive right into it. As I've said in earlier videos, there is quite a lot of material to cover, and rather than breaking this up into different videos per section within each chapter, I prefer to do the whole thing as one chunk so that we can keep this to a 10 video series. Okay, if any of it is overwhelming or you find it confusing, leave that in the comments section and maybe I will do more concise videos in the future. Obviously, if you have any questions or feedback, that's always welcome. But for now, that's what I've chosen to do. So let's dive right into it. And this section of his book is entitled Thoughts and Dreams. And the first chapter within that section is called The Abstract Mind. Okay, so if you remember before, we talked about the three layers of the mind consisting of what comes in through our senses from the outside world. That's layer one. And then we talked about the way we store that information within us as blockages, which is known in yogi science as samskaras. And then we have the third layer of the mind, which is the personal mind. And that's where we're kind of deciding how do we respond and react to that and try to make ourselves feel okay. So those are the three layers of the mind as Michael Singer describes it. And in this chapter, he starts out by saying that there's even another layer beyond those three layers, and that's called the impersonal mind or the abstract mind. Okay, and that's the mind that allows us to be free to soar to unlimited heights, Michael Singer says, into pure brilliance and creativity of a higher expression of mind. Okay, that's where we want to be. And that's what makes human beings great, he says. This mind is capable of expanding beyond the limit of your senses and the limit of your personal thoughts. And remember, if you create thoughts about what you want and don't want, which is really part of the three layers of the mind that we talked about, starting from those samskaras, then you're forcing the world to be the way you want it to be, to match your likes and dislikes. And then you're never going to be okay inside. Okay, as we're going to talk about, as we expound upon this section, we're going to talk about the idea of just how difficult it is to try and get the outside world to match your preferences and your likes and dislikes. But the outside world, as Singer says, is simply not going to magically match what you've stored in your mind. And that's not intelligent, nor is it healthy to think that it will. Okay, to think that the world is going to do precisely what we want it to do is not a very intelligent way of looking at things. And I say that as I always give the disclaimers in my videos. It's not being critical of anybody because we all do it. And I say we all, I mean, other than the masters out there who have mastered this ability to get to that fourth layer of the mind that I started this video by talking about. But for the average person who's, has his or her ups and downs and is kind of serving those samskaras I talked about in the last video, it's in reality not intelligent of any of us to try and do that because we're never going to be able to match what our preferences are to what is actually reality, what's actually coming in from the outside world through our senses. Okay, there's a much higher way to live, Singer says. But that requires that you change how you interact with your mind and with the life that's unfolding before you. Rather than trying to get everything to match your preferences, there's a better way to do it, as we're going to talk about. So Singer talks about the idea of a breakup and how you can approach something like that when it happens. Okay, so let's say you've had a breakup and then something subsequently happens that reminds you of that ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend. Now, what you end up doing when that happens is that let's say you had a girlfriend who drove a blue sports car, for example, just to pick something that's coming off the top of my mind, so to speak. Okay, so that girlfriend drove a blue sports car and you broke up with her, and now you see a blue sports car passing on the road. Okay, so the healthy way to approach that is you have that memory. She drove that blue sports car and you let that pass through you. Okay, even if it reminds you of her, which is natural, you let that experience pass through you. You can kind of look at it and wonder like, that reminds me of her, and then let it pass through. But we don't do that. What we end up doing is we start using our personal mind to start judging it. So we'll say things like, oh God, I cannot even look at another blue sports car. I can't stand blue sports cars. I hate the color blue. It reminds me of her, makes me think about her. I don't want to even look at another blue sports car. I'm never going to buy a blue sports car. I'm not going to be friends with anybody who drives blue sports cars. I'm not going to date anybody who drives blue sports cars. So all sorts of examples like that, where we start trying to match our preferences to what came in through our senses from the outside world. And what's happening is that we're resisting what reality is, because rather than just seeing a blue sports car for what it is, we start making it very personal to us. And then it turns into that blockage and samskara that we talked about. Okay. And that's where preference comes from, because we prefer not to see any blue sports cars. We prefer not to date anybody who drives a blue sports car. And that's easy to understand, Singer says, why there's so many disagreements that can happen, because each of us has our own personal experiences, as we talked about in the last video, and that's unique to each and every one of us. No two people will be raised and conditioned exactly the same. Everybody's experiences come through their own specific sensors, okay, where every single individual in this planet is unique. And therefore, it makes sense that there will be so many disagreements, because we're all going to put our own spin on things. That's not to say that people don't ever agree on things, but as you know, unfortunately, in this world, there's many, many, many disagreements throughout the world. And that's made up of all these different multitudes of preferences that's going on between different people, different preferences within one individual, let alone trying to match those preferences to another individual, and then multiply that and multiply that and multiply that. And what happens is, Singer says, when something that comes in from the outside world happens to match with a preference, which is not so easy, okay, because far more things coming in from the outside world won't. But when something does, then you feel great, right? That's great. But when something doesn't match your preference, then you're not feeling great. You're feeling pretty bad. And then what you try and do is you try and use the analytical mind to try and adjust and use strategies and tactics to try and change what's happening in the outside world to match those preferences. And that's what we talked about again, the idea of preferences and samskaras. And instead of being in awe of the moment in front of you, just for the fact that it exists, I mean, think about how, when we talked about in the video on the outside world, what it takes to bring something into being, the billions of years it takes to get to this moment in time. Rather than being in awe of that and appreciating that, we start trying to make it match what it is that we want, to match our desires and our preferences. Okay. So that's the end of that chapter. Then Singer is going to continue along with this analysis to help continue to deepen our understanding of the mind. And this chapter is called Serve the Mind or Fix It. So now Michael Singer says you have an idea what it means to have preferences from certain experiences, samskaras, and then you attempt to fix those things, which are really just attempts to compensate for blockages. But you're not getting rid of those blockages. Those blockages are still there. You're just trying to get around it. You're trying to avoid it. You're trying to escape it. You're trying to resist it. So what happens is we use the personal thoughts layer to analyze, like I just said, to analyze and intellectualize how the world needs to be to match what we want. And a lot of people try, if you look on YouTube, there's all sorts of videos where there's all sorts of gurus telling you how to change yourself or try to influence others or manipulate others. And really, that's just, again, more intellectual gymnastics to try and get people or places or things or the universe to match your preferences, okay? But that's all coming from this kind of layer of the mind that's your personal thoughts, as we talked about before. And really all that is waging war on the world. And that's why he also says decision-making can be so difficult, okay? Because you're trying to use that mind. You're trying to mix and match with the analytical mind instead of living in reality and enjoying the moment, okay? And again, I talked about in the last video, nobody's saying don't make a decision. We have to make decisions in life. But you'll know if you're doing it from a place of being in awe of the moment and being in the moment and being present to it, you will see that those decisions will more naturally flow, as opposed to when you start panicking, like, oh my gosh, this is Chapman's. What do I do now? How do I avoid this? How do I do this? And your mind is going crazy. Yes, you're making decisions, but it's not coming from that pure place of consciousness, which is where we want to be at. And Singer says a wise person realizes that the world is not going to unfold the way they want it to be, because it's not supposed to. But the unwise person says, I don't like it. It shouldn't have happened. And we've used the example time and again of not being happy that Saturn has rings, for example, okay? Or that it's raining outside. And we're going to get to these examples. And Singer says here, Buddha says, all of life is suffering, and the cause of suffering is desire. So what does that mean? All of life is suffering, and the cause of suffering is desire. What it means is that the cause of suffering is preference, deciding that you want things to be a certain way, and then getting upset when they're not that way. Events don't cause you the suffering, Singer says, and he said this in all sorts of different terminology and phraseology, which I've talked about in earlier videos. And here's another one. Events don't cause you to suffer. You cause yourself to suffer by your reactions to those events. It's your reactivity to those events that cause you suffering. So essentially what happens is we get distracted by these three layers of the mind that I talked about. Okay? And again, to remind you, the three layers are the one who receives from using our senses from the outside world. Number two is the blockages because of the preferences that we form, and those are called samskaras in yogi science. And number three is the personal mind trying to intellectualize and rationalize it and try and get it to match what we want so we can be okay. But we have the ability to actually watch all of this because we're in the seat of self. Remember from the first video, you are the observer. Okay, you are in the seat of self. It's just that you get so distracted by these thoughts of the mind that you forget about it and you lose yourself. Okay, to quote the Eminem song, lose yourself. You get lost in it. But you have the ability to take that step back and actually observe all of this. And we're going to get into just how we can do that. So that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is entitled Willful and Automatic Thoughts. So we talked about this idea of thoughts and the layers of the mind. Now, there's different types of thoughts Singer wants us to understand, okay? So you can create thoughts, okay? How do we know? Let's take an example. Let's say that I ask you to say the word hello. Hello, say the word hello, okay? You just created a thought whereby you thought to say hello. Simple, you can create thoughts, okay? So that's a willful creation of thoughts. And you can do that, by the way, in two ways, Singer says. Number one is auditory, like I just said, saying hello, you're actually verbalizing it. Number two is visualizing a thought. So for example, let's say I ask you now to visualize a boat. Okay, now visualize the boat getting bigger and bigger, and it's this huge ship. Okay, you have the ability to visualize that in your mind's eye. And that's no less a thought than the auditory verbalizing a thought. It's just a different type of thought. It's a visualized thought. So those are two types of thoughts. But then Singer says there's another category of thought which is known as automatic thoughts. They just pop into your mind on their own. And those, by the way, are the majority of your thoughts in your mind. It's a constant stream. Think about it. As you go about your day, how many thoughts are popping into your mind by the minute, okay, let alone by the second? All the time, okay? You walk home, oh, I got to eat breakfast. What am I going to eat for breakfast? I got to prepare something. Oh, I don't have any eggs in the fridge. I wanted to have eggs. I'm not going to have eggs. I better go out to the market and get some eggs. I don't know if they have any more eggs. Maybe I do have some eggs. Oh, I didn't check here. Thoughts are constantly flowing, and those are automatic thoughts, okay? You're not intentionally creating thoughts. They're just popping into your mind, kind of like popcorn popping, you know, just pop, 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 thoughts everywhere. And those thoughts can be quite destructive, okay? So, for example, you may have somebody who agreed to call you at a certain time. The time comes, person doesn't call. 5 minutes pass and 10 minutes pass. And you're getting anxiety and nervous. Did something happen to that person? Person doesn't like me anymore, yada, 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 to quote from the Seinfeld episode. I just watched that one again last night. So all these thoughts can be really destructive because they're really consuming you and consuming all that energy. Now, if you pay attention to these thoughts, you'll see that it's constantly running in your mind, and these are constantly running the show for you because you're reacting to these thoughts, okay? So this person didn't call, and all of a sudden you're thinking all these thoughts about it, like this person hates you, or maybe something happened to this person. And you can understand where these thoughts come from, Singer says, just to deepen this. Okay, so these are some scars, as we talked about, and where could this samskara have come from? So as an example, and it's just an example, you can think of your own examples. Maybe when you were 10 years old, your mother asked you to be somewhere at a certain time and you were there and your mother didn't come, and you had this huge trauma. Maybe something happened to her, or she doesn't love me. And because of that, you stored that in your mind, and that became a blockage in a samskara. And now every time you have an appointed time with somebody to call you and he or she doesn't call you, it starts triggering you back to that traumatic moment when you were 10 years old. And rather than just seeing it for what it is, the person was supposed to call and didn't call, you start turning it into a whole series of events, of thoughts in your mind, which are really consuming your energy and controlling you, all because of this samskara that you formed back when you were 10 years old. And that's really the resistance and the friction that we talked about. And Singer says, as I mentioned, again, think of all the energy you're consuming when you're giving way to these samskaras. So that's a bit of a description of the different types of thoughts, whether it's automatic thoughts or it's thoughts that we actually willfully create. The vast majority of thoughts will be the automatic thoughts, as we talked about, and that's the end of this chapter. And Singer continues with the discussion now into dreams and the subconscious. Okay, so now we're going to even deeper the idea of thoughts and start getting into the dream state. We were talking about the waking state, and I'll return to that, but let's start talking about the dream state just to further deepen our understanding of what it is to have thoughts and what those thoughts are and what they mean. So, as Singer says, one of the favorite topics of psychology is the psychology behind dreams. And the Freudian concept of a dream is that an event is happening on the outside level, but it's an unfinished impression in the mind. So for example, let's say Singer says a boy who wanted a bike and his parents didn't buy it for him. So he may have a dream in which he did receive that bike. Okay, as a simple example. Freud would call that type of dream wish fulfillment. Okay, wish fulfillment. It's a samskara formed in the waking mind, which releases energy by creating thoughts that you watch while you're asleep. Okay, and what does that mean? What does that mean you're watching thoughts while you're asleep? Well, think about it. Why are your dreams more vivid, right? Sometimes we wake up and it's like, oh my God, I had the most vivid dream in the world. Like you can picture all of it, even in its all its fantastical details. And why is that? Because your mind can focus entirely on the thoughts in sleep, because there's no distractions that are going on that you might otherwise have in your waking state. Okay? And further, you're not pushing away or suppressing those thoughts that are coming into your dreams. And that's why the dreams that you have are much more creative generally than the thoughts that you have in your waking state, because those dreaming thoughts are unobstructed, they're unhindered by the distractions of your mind, or the distractions of the thoughts of your mind, I should say, while you're awake. So Singer says, when you stop suppressing those uncomfortable experiences, you'll see that really there's no division, there's no duality between the consciousness and the subconscious mind. It's really an artificial creation that's based on suppressing our thoughts. Okay, we always talk about the idea of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And yes, there is that concept, but really that's an artificial division. And Singer has a brilliant example to help us understand that. Think about if you're at a party and you're in a room, okay? You're in a room at a party, and one half of the room has people that you like, and one half of the room has people you don't like. So what you do is you act like the half of the room that contains the people you don't like, you don't even want to look at, like they don't exist. You try and make it like they don't exist. You stuff that in there, okay? You don't even want to pay attention to that, and you're only paying attention to half of the room which contains the people that you like. So really, it's all one room, all containing people, but you've artificially created a division. You've made a division of half the room where you don't like people and half the room where you do. So you're paying attention only to the half of the room where you like the people. But again, it's all really one room. Now, what Singer says is, fortunately, so bringing us back to the analogy of the room back to the mind between the conscious and the subconscious, fortunately, these two minds, so to speak, and they're not really two, but these two minds, so to speak, will merge when you stop suppressing those images, okay? And then you'll fully realize the power that you actually have. And imagine that power when your mind is actually running and firing on all cylinders, okay? Because a lot of times, or not a lot of times, all of us virtually, unless you're a master, are not firing on all four cylinders, because we're creating these divisions based on what we're suppressing. We're very limited in what we're allowing through to pass. We're not using the full capabilities of our mind. But if you start merging and integrating everything that passes through, all those experiences, imagine the power of creativity that you have to be able to use the entire mind that we've been given. And Singer says the common thread between both the waking and the dreaming states is that it really is the same consciousness that's aware of both. And how do we know? How do we know that you are aware of your dream state, even when you're sleeping, for example? Because when you wake up, you say, oh, what a dream that I had. How do you know that you had that dream? Because you are conscious of it. It's just in your dreaming state, but you are conscious of that dream state. Okay, so that's the common thread. You are conscious of both. When you're awake, you can be conscious of the thoughts that you're having, and when you're sleeping, you're conscious of the dreams that you're having. That's a common thread. There's consciousness all the way through. And Singer gets into a whole discussion of some yogis that talk about this idea of consciousness in the dreaming state and how you work off karma, and it's really a positive thing. I'm not going to get into that in this video, but definitely in the book, I recommend that you pay attention to that and be conscious of it when you're reading this section in the book. So it's really quite amazing what you can learn from the dreaming state, Singer says. In fact, when you think about it, there are some thoughts that are just so traumatic and so disturbing to us and so strong in the samskaras that we can't even dream about it directly. So for example, God forbid, let's say somebody has a relative that died and it's very traumatic to that person. Somebody may have a dream that kind of indirectly references that relative. Maybe that relative wore a certain sweater all the time. So you have a dream about a sweater, even though it's not about that relative per se. But that dream is trying to help you release those energies from the blockages that you stored by thinking about the deceased relative in your waking state. That's how powerful it is, but it isn't always direct. Sometimes it's an indirect way. That's how powerful these samskaras are as well. Okay. And what's going on, Singer says, is that your mind is always trying to heal itself, just like the physical body wants to heal itself. For example, if you cut yourself, we have for the average healthy person, that cut will naturally heal on its own. The body will do its wonders to heal itself. Same with the mind. The mind is trying to heal itself from these samskaras, from this blocked energy by releasing energy. And how does it do it? Part of how it does it is in its dreaming state. It actually does it in the waking state too, but a lot of times we get in the way by keeping to try and block down these energies as they lift up because it doesn't feel good. But in your dream state, you're much less hindered, and it's a wonderful opportunity to really release those blocked energies. That concludes that chapter on dreaming and the subconscious. And this takes us to the final chapter within this section, and Singer will continue to drive the point home. So Singer says, now you can appreciate the tremendous power of your mind. Okay, so many different layers and thoughts, and the dream state and the waking state and the consciousness and the subconsciousness, which is really all one, as we said. Look how powerful it is. Okay, you don't even willfully create dreams. Your mind has the power to do it on its own, and does do it on its own. But it's not only when you sleep, Singer says, because your thoughts are constantly running. These are called waking dreams. What a concept. Okay, the personal thoughts that the voice says is because of the samskara stored inside in your mind, trying to release these blockages while still awake. I kind of alluded to this. I guess I jumped the gun a little bit, but that's what's happening. Just like the mind is trying to heal itself by releasing energies and blockages in the dream state, it's also doing it even in the awakened state, okay? As Singer calls it, in the awakened dreams, in your waking dreams of your thoughts. And the vast majority of what you unfortunately store inside is negative, Singer says. Why is that? Because again, as we talked about, what comes in from the outside world usually will not match your preferences, and therefore it turns into a negativity. And when that negativity feeling comes in, you try and compound it with another thought, and then what's happening in reality doesn't always match that, and it keeps compounding and compounding. That's why so many of us are storing so much negative. All of us really are storing so much negativity inside. We did talk about the idea of clinging and trying to store positive things as well. But as I said in the earlier video, we end up transforming that, unfortunately, oftentimes into negativity when those images and thoughts that we cling to don't tend to come to fruition. So there's just an abundance of negativity that's constantly compounding and compounding. And this is all based on those preferences, okay? Then what you're trying to do about it with the personal mind to try and be okay. So Singer says, as we conclude this video and the section in Singer's book, we've learned about the complexities of the mind, how we tend to focus on things and create that false sense of self. What do we mean by false sense of self? We try and change and manipulate things to try and match the outside world to our preferences, when really the outside world has nothing to do with us. And really what we should be doing is just allowing the experience to pass. But fortunately, Singer says, there's a way out of it, and that's called witness consciousness. Witness consciousness. You can learn to sit back and simply witness these voices in your mind, witness these thoughts. Instead of desiring to fight these voices and to fight these thoughts, you've created them. Okay, so instead of reacting to these samskaras that you started, don't create anymore. And to use an example, don't try and fight these thoughts, okay? You created them. Singer says, don't you dare try and fight them. Think about the example if you're eating unhealthy food, and as a result of that, you get sick. You don't start yelling at the food that you ate. You just stop eating the food, okay? You observe that this food caused you to get sick. Stop eating the food. It's not about fighting the food and yelling at the food that you ate. Same with these thoughts that come in. Don't start yelling at them and trying to fight them. And again, that's a war you're not going to win. And in fact, that's just more blockages and more samskaras and more samskaras. Rather, take a witness conscious approach, observe them, and then work on releasing them and letting them go. It's simple, as I've talked about, but very difficult to learn and to implement, but you can do it. And Michael Singer is here to help us do that as we go through the chapters and the videos. But before we get into these techniques that Singer will talk about later on, there's an added element just to further our understanding of what's going on. And that's based on the heart creating emotions and feelings. Okay, remember we talked about the three-ring circus. We talked about the outside world. We talked about the thoughts of the mind. And then there's the emotions and feelings coming from the heart. And that's going to be the focus of the next chapter and section in Michael Singer's book. Okay, so I hope this deepened your understanding even more of the mind, the complexities of the mind, the brilliance of the mind, what we can be doing with the power of the mind when we stop creating these false senses of self, stop creating this duality and merging with the oneness of the mind. There's no real conscious and subconscious. It's really all one. It's only the divisions we make based on samskaras and preferences to try and fight what's happening in reality. Okay, but really the mind is a powerful thing. And if we can get back to observing our thoughts and getting into witness consciousness and learning how to let go and enjoy the experiences as they come up, as opposed to fighting it, we're really going to see the full power of our mind and how wonderful it is. And again, before we get there, we're going to first take a detour, or not a detour, but continue on along with our understanding of this three-ring circus by getting into feelings and emotions that stem from the heart. Okay, so that concludes this video, this part of Michael Singer's book. If you have any comments or questions, those are always welcome. That will help not only you deepen your understanding by asking questions or leaving comments so that I can respond to it, other viewers can respond to it, but it will also help me deepen my understanding. So selfishly, again, I ask you for your comments and feedback. And as always, if you did enjoy the video, I would appreciate if you took just a second to hit that thumb up button to like it and to subscribe to the channel, which will not only help me to grow this channel and give me that encouragement to keep going, to know that you're out there appreciating the channel, but also for yourself to not miss a future video. So until next time, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. You'd not only be helping me, you'd also be helping yourself to not miss a future video. Your comments and feedback are always welcome. And don't forget to hit the actual like button on the video as well. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one.